part two of our Selling in the New Environment webinar series. This one is called Engaging Customers at Arm's Length. Before we get started, let me just give you a couple of announcements. First of all, similar to other webinars that we've been doing, this webinar is pre-recorded, but we are going to take questions live at the end of it. So if you do have questions, please put those in the question and answer prompt as the webinar is happening, and we'll do our best to address those at the end. We hope everyone is doing well, that you're all safe, and we look forward to the conversation today. So to get started, let me introduce myself again. My name is Spence Wixom. I'm the Senior Vice President of Marketing and Business Development at Challenger. And I'm really excited to introduce a special guest that I have today for the webinar. It's Pat Spenner. He's an old colleague of mine and also co-author of the Challenger Customer book. And before I get too far on that, Pat, why don't I let you introduce yourself?
Oh, yeah, happy to. Thanks, Spencer. So Pat Spenner here, everybody. I'm joining you from New Zealand today, so it's always good to see how the other half is getting along in the times we're in. And thanks for the opportunity, Spencer, to join you and have this conversation. I've been looking forward to this for weeks, and so it should be fun. By way of background, I ran the Marketing Leadership Council at CEB prior to its acquisition by Gartner a number of years ago. Ran the council for probably 8 or 10 years, kind of bookending the period of research that led to Challenger across those number of years from, the great financial crisis to, and beyond, really. Managed a variety of programs, oversaw the research team there that did kind of the Challenger research on the marketing side, as we kind of integrated those research streams and kind of took the Challenger story to be the broader commercial and go-to-market story that it is. Since CEB, moving to New Zealand, I've been running marketing and product for a startup here, and currently I'm doing commercial transformation leadership and a bit of consulting on the side on, go-to-market strategy, content strategy, those sorts of things. So it's great to join you today, and thanks to everybody for making the time to join us.
No, Pat, we really appreciate you joining us. And I just want to make a plug to those listening as well. Pat is a tremendous subject matter expert on the ideas of marketing and sales collaboration in complex B2B environments, and particularly implementing this Challenger concept across the commercial organization. We've got his LinkedIn profile listed there, as well as his email, and I'd highly recommend connecting with him and making him part of your network. But Pat, what I'd like to talk... Oh, what'd you say?
I said I welcome that. Yep.
Good. Even though he's all the way over there in New Zealand, where we're very jealous of you, by the way. Pat, what I want to talk about, where I want to start, is talking about this book, The Challenger Customer, which, of course, built on the themes of the Challenger sale, which was launched in the global financial crisis of about 10 years ago, and really focused, and I talked to Matt Dixon about this a couple of weeks ago, really focused on high-performance sales behavior in a complex environment. Because what we found was that that was the real difference maker between high performers and core performers, was a high performer's ability to react to a complex environment, understand it, and perform effectively with customers through it. And what was interesting to me about the Challenger Customer that came behind is it took that idea of managing complexity, understanding it, and reacting effectively to it to a broader level that included both the sales organization as well as the marketing organization, and how we could address some of these issues of added complexity, like risk aversion, more stakeholders, and less consensus. What I'd love to ask you about, having written this book and researched it out, is what were some of the things that were surprising to you, really important, that you understood and identified in this book that may be particularly important today as well?
Yeah, well, number one that stands out for me is just the look that we took inside of customer organizations and the buying process, the purchase process. And the startling statistic to my eyes, I remember when we first discovered this, trolling through the quantitative data, was just the number of stakeholders involved in a typical purchase decision. At the time, it was 5.4, and since then, that's only grown. And the gut punch was, what happens to the likelihood of any decision a purchase decision happening, the more stakeholders you add. And that's eye-opening. It really puts you as a sales leader, as a marketing leader or a marketer or a rep, and it forces you inside the shoes of, not just the person you're talking to, but the broader group of folks that has to come to some kind of consensus for any kind of purchase decision to happen. And, when you take that and couple it with some of the insights around how much research customers were doing prior to ever really, picking up the phone or firing up the email to engage supplier sellers directly, it really underscored this notion that, marketing and sales will just have to work much more closely together to engage customers along the entire purchase journey to really, guide that journey in a way that's ultimately going to lead to a quality sale. So those were some of the big themes to us that just popped out of the research that, were really surprising at the time and important, I think.
I do completely agree. And it's interesting just kind of moving forward in the slide flow here. Here's a graphic from that book that talks about what you're talking about. And it's a graphic that's been updated over time, right? That 5.4 buying group in 2015 when the book was first published, increasing to 6.8 in 2016. It's up to 11 in 2019. And our Challenger group, in some research we've been doing recently, just a few weeks ago, went out and asked sales leaders, do you expect that buying group size to go down, stay the same, go up in the current environment, this kind of post-COVID environment? And 90% of them said it'll stay the same or it'll go up. And so we're not going to get a respite from that complexity of number of stakeholders anytime soon. And I think the other interesting thing that you were talking about there is the need to bring them together and build consensus among them. And that becomes all the more difficult to do when they are, number one, remote from one another. You can't very easily today bring them all together in a room and present to them collectively. And number two, they've all got burning fires in their particular departments that they've got to deal with. They have serious operational issues that they're looking at. So how do you get their attention collectively and, in a sense, bring them to the table to make a decision?
Yeah, it really raises the bar on the insights that we're providing to them, how we're engaging with those stakeholders, how can we innovate to create these sort of shared learning experiences that the buying group has together. One thing I think we found in the research was just that creating those shared moments, those shared experiences where the buying group can get on the same page and have the back and forth with one another to hash things out and get to a consensus spot. You're right. The remote work environment makes that tougher, and it's going to force suppliers to up their game, to innovate in some ways that, hopefully we'll touch on across the rest of the conversation here. And yeah, it's sobering to think about the stat you've got on the page here around the buying group size holding steady or growing. From our own experience at companies that I'm working with now, we certainly see that. If nothing else, you probably have an extra person in the buying group from finance who's, putting extra scrutiny on the spend. And so bare minimum, you've got that. And in a lot of cases, you may have some additional folks creeping into the picture too. So yeah, it's a call to action and clarifying, I think, this data.
Yeah. And I love the point that you just made there. And I really want to put a pin in it is, what if we can't get them all in a room together and basically orchestrate that experience? What can we provide that builds that collective yes, that builds that consensus among them? And let's explore it, because I'm not going to give away the punchline, but it's really important for sales and marketing, hint, to consider. Hey, one more sort of current dismal insight that I want to share, and then we'll move on to talking about some of the tactics and the solutions. But I think this is an interesting one to consider, and it comes out of our most recent pulse survey that we've been doing of sales and marketing leaders. And we asked some questions specifically about this sales velocity formula, because I think going back to the content on the previous slide where it says, the more stakeholders you have, the less likely that deal is to get done in a fixed period of time. And all of us need to get deals done now in this environment. We can't just put things on ice. We have to keep that sales motion going, that sales velocity going. But what is going to affect that sales velocity in most organizations? And we asked about it, the 4 key levers of the sales velocity formula in particular: number of opportunities in pipeline, length of sales cycle, average deal value, conversion rate, and how common the perception was that this would decline by more than 5% given the current environment. And what you see with the data on the page here is really interesting. Most organizations, the vast majority, expect number of opportunities in the pipeline to decrease by 5% or more. Length of sales cycle, there's a minority there who think it will increase. Most think it'll probably stay about the same. Average deal value, stay about the same. Conversion rate, the majority will see that going down. So what this says to me that's really interesting is, number one, we've got to be laser focused on getting more attention from more customers out there and bringing them into this opportunity cycle in the first place. And secondly, we've got to think about the quality of the way we nurture that buying group through, so we don't run into a situation where the majority of our deals are ending in no decision. They're pushing to the next quarter or the next year. We've got to find a way to get them across the line.
Yeah, that's right. You do the math on this page itself, and the majority of commercial teams are looking at at least a 10% plus reduction in dollars coming through the pipeline, at least, right? And so, to my mind, the data point, wearing my marketing hat that I associate with this is, the prior to the COVID crisis, the conversion rate on a marketing qualified lead, right? This is a lead that marketing deems, the commercial team deems qualified at that stage, hovered between 3 and 4%. So it's not as if things were great in terms of conversion before. And, for a long time, I think, we've been focused on that, and how can we create a more compelling engagement path that is going to produce higher quality leads. In this environment, that's kind of, if I'm a commercial leader, I want more leads, but I want more qualified leads. And the way that we engage customers throughout is what creates that quality. I think a lot of times, marketing leaders kind of take a little bit of a hands-off approach on, hey, if this prospect ticks these boxes, then they're qualified, without necessarily appreciating just how much we as commercial teams can influence a lead going from, modest quality to high quality through the way that we engage them with insight, how we teach them, who we're engaging, at that customer organization. So, we'll get into that a bit more, I think, but, it's really compelling data, and, my hat's off to Challenger for running these pulse surveys. I think it's super smart. I'd encourage everyone who's listening, if you're not participating in these, to please do participate. Because what I think people are very hungry for right now is a sense of, what are my peers seeing? And that's a service that any supplier can be engaged in right now, is providing to your customer base, your prospect base, a really on the ground inside look at what your customers' peers are seeing and experiencing, because that's what your stakeholders are hungry for right now, is to understand how others are tackling this kind of stuff. So anyways, love this page, and it's an important one for us to consider the implications of.
Absolutely. And before we move on, just one more thing I wanted to highlight about it is those two statistics on the bottom of the page. And we see these, we do these poll surveys every 2 weeks, and we've seen these numbers explode over the last 4 to 6 weeks, which is the idea of the percentage of companies changing their messaging or their insights to apply to the current environment. And number two, changing the allocation of marketing budget, realizing they need to do something different in the marketing space to engage customers. So, almost 2/3 in both of those cases, over 2/3 in both of those cases, changing the messaging and the insights, relooking at the marketing budget and in what we do. So there's a big push toward that right now, and I think it's an important thing to consider.
Yeah, and it'll be interesting to see. I think there's a real danger in this one too. Having spent a lot of time talking with marketing leaders, there's a danger for marketers in particular to make a set of changes that are kind of cosmetic. Let's put the COVID gloss on the messaging and dial up the, how often we reference the pandemic and things like that. And that wears thin really quickly. Speaking for myself, I'm already kind of burned on reading COVID stuff, right? It's like, God, give me something else. And so, I think the really thoughtful commercial teams are going to dive in and use this time to reconsider their core insights that they're bringing to the market, because these times when things are in flux and where we're at an inflection point, as not just in business, but as a civilized society, these are times when old assumptions and thoughts and beliefs are the ones that until recently had been valid. Many of these are being invalidated now, and in terms of heading towards a new normal. And these are the inflection points where every company has a chance to revisit the insights and the messaging that they're bringing to market, because, in good challenger fashion, that's about reframing the way that customers think about their own business. And underneath that is changing their thoughts and beliefs and assumptions about the way that their business works. And in this moment, there's a chance for every company to be doing foundational research there and to come up with very compelling insights to share with customers. So, I'll encourage, and we'll talk about this more, diving below the cosmetic changes in messaging to really get to the core of how we're speaking with customers and how we see things unfolding.
I love that point that you just made, diving below the cosmetic changes. It's not enough to just show, hey, we recognize what's going on, but we actually have a point of view that is powerful, disruptive, interesting, and novel in this environment. And this is a great segue into what I wanted to talk to you about here. So I've been recently kind of going back through the Challenger customer with my automatic pencil and making a lot of notes in it and restudying it. And one of the things that I came across that I hadn't been appreciating as much as I should were what you call these tiger traps in building content. And when you first look at them, right, looking smart, being useful, being present, you kind of say, how could those not universally be a good thing in building content? But I think, and let's get into this, I think in today's environment, particularly in this post-COVID environment, it's really important for us to consider how these are tiger traps and to not fall into them if we want our content to be more than, as you say, just cosmetically adjusted to the environment. So if you could just take a second and kind of play with why these are tiger traps in particular.
Yeah, you're right. It was like you look at these and you think, well, how could you argue with these? These all seem like great things. And the devil is a little bit in the details. So, looking smart, this is what underpins pretty much all thought leadership that you'll see out there. The belief that, if we can have an expert perspective and be seen as experts in the space, then, when the prospect or the customer comes around to thinking about a problem in their space and a solution, then they'll think of us first. That's sort of the chain of logic that happens behind the scenes. And we'll talk about in a minute how that chain of logic can go wrong. But that's what's underneath it. The tendency is to is to build up the picture of what life could look like, and not pay enough attention to the customer's current pain. So we'll come on to in a minute. Being useful, this is for quite some time. You'll see this all over LinkedIn and all these spots. Marketers creating the kind of listicle content. It's like 5 ways to run a more effective virtual sales meeting, et cetera, all this kind of stuff, which is meant to be useful. And a lot of times the way that content gets created is we'll go and we'll look to see, hey, what search terms is our target audience looking at? And hey, if we can understand the things they're searching for, let's write content to those search terms. Like, on the face of it, you think, yeah, why wouldn't you do that? The problem is everybody does that. And, what we know from all the challenger research is that, challengers understand and mobilizers understand. We'll get to mobilizers in a minute. These key stakeholders inside the customer organization, they understand that, they want to be told what are they not thinking about now but should be. And if you follow the logic there and you're a marketer and you're focusing on, hey, what do my target audience, what do they know that they're searching for? What are they visibly searching for? That's going to take you down a path where you have a lot of undifferentiated content, because you know what? Everyone else is looking at that too. So, being useful is more about, hey, how do we think about the things that the customer might be missing? And then being present, this is just sort of the standard coverage challenge that marketers face of, as soon as you try to create content that speaks to, each of 4 personas times 4 business units times, 4 bits of content a month times 3 different touch points, the math just explodes as to how much content you feel like you need to create. Inevitably, quality of the content suffers for the sake of quantity, and we find ourselves in this feed the beast content mode that harms all of the content we're creating, right? And so the whole idea here with what we'll get to is to create less content, but have it be much more purposeful. And I think that resonates with a lot of commercial leaders out there. So maybe we can get into some of what that might actually look like then.
Yeah, and just a follow-up point to what you were saying just then, what's so interesting that we're seeing in the market as we talk to a lot of sales leaders and marketing leaders is, even within particular segments or industries that you may be targeting, there are some parts of those segments or industries that are performing quite well and open up a commercial opportunity. And there are some parts or segments that are completely closed down. So all of a sudden, your segmenting becomes much more nuanced. And the marketers have their heads starting to explode, because it's like, how do I bring a relevant message to all of these different segments who are all experiencing something very different in this environment? And if I'm just chasing all of them without some kind of a central purpose or a strategy, I will work myself to the bone and probably not even come close to approaching a coherent, effective market coverage.
That's right. You'll work yourself to the bone and you won't see the needle move on conversion rate or any of those key metrics that we were looking at, a page or 2 back. So that's exactly right.
Well, let's jump into, so we've got this look smart trap, we got the be useful trap, the be present trap. Let's kind of dive in a little bit more deeply into some of the solutions around that, some of the things we should be focused on. And this is a kind of age-old mantra as it relates to Challenger that I think is really important to consider, right? Is the content we're building and the message we're presenting, is it aligned to breaking down the A state of the customer or building up the B state of the customer? And in the conversation I had with Matt Dixon a few weeks ago, we talked about, that is really kind of a core difference between thought leadership and commercial insight. Thought leadership is designed to make you look smart. Like, look at the perspective I'm bringing, the things I understand. And attacking that A state with commercial insight is all about really empathizing with, engaging the customer where they are today and unteaching that status quo, breaking that down so that you open up their mind to a new way of thinking. And it's a really critical difference. I think we do need to get outside of ourselves particularly in this environment, and recognize and teach to what is important to the customer today, and not just promoting ourselves in a sense.
Yeah, and as part of the research we did on the Marketing Leadership Council, years ago when we canvassed a whole range of thought leadership in the marketplace, what you'll find is that 95% of it dwells over there on the right-hand side, focusing on the B. Here's how great life is with this, cutting-edge technology that, by the way, happens to be the centerpiece of our new product, right? And so, a lot of the B will lead with how great life is with this, changing environment, this new technology, this new these trends, whatever it might be that thought leadership is about. That to some degree, you'll touch on, but what we found was far more compelling to focus on was the A, because ultimately if a customer is going to purchase a solution from you, that involves making a change of some kind in their organization. And change is really hard. And in particular, in today's environment where you kind of get an extra layer of risk aversion in C-suites, change can be a scary thing, and so pain of same greater than pain of change was always the mantra that we carried with this. If we're not making that true for customers, they're very likely to consume our thought leadership and read it and engage with it and nod their heads along, but they're really unlikely to move in that direction at the end of the day if they don't view their status quo as being painful enough that they need to do that. And so, the best content, commercial insight wise that we see, has to break down that A and really puts 80% of the effort. You kind of have to oversteer to the left side of this page and breaking down the A before you go on to build up the B. So it's creating that urgency for action, and really, and coming back to this point in time, breaking down a customer's A state is about diving underneath to understand what are the thoughts, beliefs, and assumptions they hold, not about you as a supplier, but about themselves, the way that their business works. And right now in this moment, there are so many thoughts, beliefs, and assumptions that business leaders are probably going to cling to, but some of them are going to realize that those assumptions are going to get shaken loose by the pandemic and what's coming next in the new normal. So it's a great opportunity for suppliers to really focus in and dive into how are the thoughts, beliefs, and assumptions of our customers, going to get outdated or outmoded by COVID, and what should they be replacing those with? And if we construct this very purposefully, we can do that in a way that leads uniquely to what we do well as a supplier, right? And so that's the whole notion behind creating a commercial insight. So, to my mind, those are some of the thoughts that come to mind on the A to B here.
Yeah, and if I could just make one more comment on it that I thought was really interesting as I was rereading the book, is really thinking about the case studies or the customer examples and how they line up with this A-B continuum as well. So much of our case studies, customer testimonials focus on that B, this is what I did, and the outcome, and don't really tell that full compelling story of this is the way we used to think, and this is why we were incorrect. And I really think both in content as well as in conversation and dialogue, if you can bring those stories back and include that kind of before and after state in those stories, it makes them so much more compelling, believable, and motivating to customers to engage with.
Yeah, and just practically useful. If you're a mobilizer or one of the old 5.4, the now 11 and growing, chances are you don't buy solutions like this every day, not as often as the suppliers sell them. And so you're hungry to understand how to navigate the change aspect and building the consensus around what's the nature of the problem that we have to begin with. What's the nature of the solution it's going to take to get there? How do you actually realize what your problem is and pull the right stakeholders together around a consensus change path? Like all of that stuff kind of happens before hey, we selected this supplier and here's how great they are and so on and so forth. That's nice. But man, if you want to be useful to your stakeholders, your mobilizers, really doubling down on the A side and how that changed, that's being useful and helpful, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So look, just jumping forward, because I also want to talk with you very specifically about kind of the nature of the message. So we talk about being useful, right? And needing to think differently about that. And I always love this statistical finding from the book of, right, what drives impact, what gets a customer out of his or her chair and moves their direction, moves them to take action in a different direction. And it's not a lot of the things that you would historically think, right? A smart and expert perspective, easy to understand, containing interesting facts and anecdotes, because that's table stakes, right? That's what everybody provides. It's these two things on the left-hand side there. Teach them something new and give them a compelling reason to take action. And what I'd love for you to comment on, Pat, in particular, is how that aligns as well to what makes content shareable, right? What makes content sort of not only consumed and made interesting by an individual, but makes them want to share it with other people, because that's such a critical part today. Like you were saying, you've got to have individuals in a customer organization want to share the content with other individuals to build that consensus.
Yeah, so, to your point, Spencer, the stuff on the right, in this analysis, it was not statistically significant. To your point, it's not meant to say that these are unimportant. It's just that they're table stakes. And when it comes, if you're looking at this outcome of what actually changes a buyer's direction, like what you need your content to do is to be surprising in a way. You have to teach something new. And if you can do that, that on its own can be surprising. And then, there's obviously ways of doing phrasing and graphics and, the presentation of the content that can dial up the surprise factor. And if you look at what kind of content gets shared, surprise or the level of surprise is one of the number one drivers of that. And then, that compelling reason to take action is right back on, the A to B, pain of same, greater than pain of change. So unless we're providing a compelling reason for the customer to move off their status quo, in other words, making their status quo feel more painful than the change journey they'd have to go on to move off of it, they'll engage with your content, but at the end of the day, they won't take action on it. And to me, if you study that stat that I looked at, that I shared before, around 3 or 4% of marketing qualified leads ultimately convert. So much of that other 96%, you might, as a marketer, commercial team, be saying, oh, hey, they're engaging with their content. They're engaging with their content. That's a good thing. That's a good thing. But, that to me is a large reason that, that conversion rate isn't higher than the 3 to 4%, is they're reading your content, they're engaging with it, but it's not compelling enough to lead them to take action, right? And so you can get kind of a false positive looking at some of your engagement metrics, thinking that, oh, this is good, customers are engaging with it, but ultimately they're not really taking action on it. So, that's what's kind of underneath the importance of that particular bar as well.
Yeah. And when you talk about getting them to take action, there's this idea of like the initial action of, you've got my attention, I've learned what you've had to present, but then also kind of moving them through a purposeful decision journey that leads to active sales conversations and ultimately a purpose, a decision. And I love this framework that was presented in the Challenger Customer book, because you can kind of think about all of the content and that either your salespeople are delivering to customers or you're delivering it through marketing, and making sure that all the content that you're building and you're presenting has a particular purpose to move the customer to an action that will ultimately be a purchase decision. And of course, we call this the SPARK, introduce, confront framework. And Pat, I know you're an expert on this. You're one of the people that came up with this. So I would love just your perspective on why this is so important, particularly today. Yeah,
for me, there's a couple of important things going on this slide. So number one thing is you've got the 57% point on there, right? So if this is, and this will be different by industry, in a lot of industries, people will tell you this is 75 or 80%, customers are that far through the purchase journey before they're actively engaging supplier sales reps, right? And having the deeper conversation directly with suppliers. And so, we know that all of the things that they're doing up to that point is research and understanding what do they believe their problem is, and what are the requirements of the solution that they're going to be looking for, and what is the performance, what's the minimum performance they need on each of the criteria that they're laying out. And a lot of these guys will land on a viewpoint of that's, if it isn't cast in concrete by the time they're talking to suppliers, it's, that concrete is quickly drying. And, at that point, it's tougher as a seller to come in and to kind of break that up and try to reframe the customer around, hey, actually, you missed these buying criteria that are really important to you, and you should be thinking about this differently. It's tougher to do that there. So the way to think about this, again, as a combined commercial team, sales and marketing together, is to think about the commercial insights first off, right? So where are the points that we can reframe customers, and as you said before, Spencer, unteach them a set of thoughts or beliefs or assumptions they have about their business, and lead them to a spot that's going to be better for them and uniquely favor us as a supplier. So really nailing the commercial insight. Once you've nailed the commercial insight, this Spark, Introduce, Confront, it could sort of be thought of as reverse engineering back from that commercial insight to say, okay, how do we now lead prospects and customers to our commercial insight? And so, the Spark content is that short form, attention grabbing content that's potentially surprising. It's capturing their attention. It's intriguing the customer to learn more. It's challenging them a little bit on how they think about their business today. And it's getting them to say, to have that sort of head cock to say, that's interesting, or a head scratch, and they want to go explore more. Introduce content then is going to be slightly longer form content that unpacks kind of the mechanics of how your commercial insight works. Like, here's the set of assumptions or thoughts or beliefs that you, customer or stakeholder, hold about your business, about this problem today. Let us show you how, you might be missing a couple of things here. And here's what you're missing. And, if we convince you of that, here's naturally where that takes you, right? You can get a customer sort of nodding their head and saying, okay, yep, got it. They still could let themselves off the hook at that point, though. And so this is where confront content becomes really important. This is interactive content that lets that customer explore that commercial insight in their own terms. So this typically looks like, something like a diagnostic tool or a return on pain eliminated calculator that sizes the customer's current pain. It lets the customer input their own answers for their business and get a read in their own terms on, just what is their A state? What's their status quo? What's the pain associated with it? What's the gap between where they are today and where they need to be? That puts it in their own terms. It confronts them with the commercial insight. And if you've had them do that, as a seller going into that sales conversation, if you've constructed this intelligently, you love those conversations, right? Because you've got all kinds of intelligence around the customer's A state coming into that conversation. A lot of times that conversation, you'd spend a lot of time on discovery of what their A state is, right? So if you can get ahead of that, you can really crunch the sales cycle there and make that your precious face-to-face time, or, virtual face-to-face time these days, that much more powerful. So, that's the Spark, Introduce, Confront kind of framework here, and it's all tied to commercial insight. If you're doing this well, you're doing a lot less content, but it's much more thoughtful, much more purposeful, and it's tied to your go-to-market strategy much more tightly.
Yeah, and I love that idea of when we tie it to our go-to-market strategy, very purposeful like that. It brings sales and marketing working together, delivering the same message, albeit through conversation or through digital channels. And I think it's also important to recognize in this environment that we're likely going to have fewer of these buying journeys created organically by customers. And the number of opportunities in the pipeline going down for the vast majority of organizations, it's because you can't just sit around and react to this established demand anymore. So Spark Introduce Confront gives you a very powerful framework to basically build a supply side marketing and sales engine that can go out there and create demand, not just react to it.
It's a great way of putting it. If I'm thinking about, if I'm a commercial leader right now, and I'm worried about my team being engaged and productive at a time when, maybe we're not getting a lot of inbound activity, or when, things are just slow out there. One of the things that I would be doing is really focusing the team on the commercial insight creation and all of the purpose that sits underneath this, and developing commercial insight, given what we mentioned before around, customers' thoughts, beliefs, and assumptions, being at an inflection point and potentially being invalidated. So I'd be focusing right now on developing this refreshed commercial insight and the content that goes behind it, so that we can, as things start to turn the corner, hopefully they will in the not too distant future, we can come out of that in this teaching posture, this commercial insight posture, in this posture of Spark Introduce Confront.
Absolutely. You and I, our organization Challenger has put together kind of content, sales and marketing ecosystems around Spark Introduce Confront for a number of companies. I'm going back to an oldie but goodie here for our conversation, Pat, because this is one that you and I worked on together. And what I love about this one from many years ago with Phillips 66, and basically just in the interest of time, Phillips 66 was interested in developing a campaign to basically sell a new experience to their franchise gas station owners, getting them to update the overall experience of the gas station and not just be concerned about selling gas at the cheapest price on the marquee. And what I wanted to show here was just to put this Spark Introduce Confront into some basic context for folks. And what I love about it, and then I'll turn it over to you, Pat, to give your comments, is you see just very simple infographics, demand gen emails, direct mails that are very focused on the customer. They're asking questions of the customer. They're challenging that customer's status quo, and doing so in a very simple and clear way that speaks to intuition and sort of percolates the surprise and the interest of the customer. And then you lead them to a microsite that can educate them, and ultimately, to the point you were making, an online diagnostic that makes for those really powerful conversations and experiences where they're seeing, this is what this is costing me today. This is the pain associated with my status quo. And I'm benchmarking that against what it could be or what it is for competitors. And that just leads to very powerful sales conversations and opportunities.
Yeah, exactly right. And I could put a little color on some of what you see on the page here. To the surprising point, I love some of the collateral that the team came up with, and I'll have to give a shout out here to Scott Gillum, who at the time was at Gyro. He now is at Carbon Design, and who's been a partner to to CEB and Challenger on bringing this kind of Challenger effort to life. But the infographic over there on the left is a fun one, right? The headline on it is, and this is to gas station owners, right? Do you foot flush in your own gas station, right? It's these challenging, very human, getting into the psychology of, that's a challenging question, and it's kind of provoking. The direct mail piece is great in that, it was sort of this fold up piece that isn't, just another letter that hits your inbox. When this thing lands on your desktop, sometimes delivered by a Phillips 66 sales rep, it's very engaging because the thing pops up and is meant to kind of be a sort of a gas station and engaging, 3D infographic, if you will. The microsite, unpacks the commercial insight around the role of experience in driving customer loyalty these days, and in the gas station purchase process or the gas purchase process. And then that online diagnostic it's just really powerful to highlight the gap for the gas station owners on where they are today and where they need to be, how they sit against their peers. So super powerful stuff to have that all tied together.
Yeah, and just to plug the Challenger Customer book, there's some great examples in that book of how organizations use this framework and some of the content that they build around it. Pat, in the interest of time, we've talked a lot about the message and how we need to collaborate sales and marketing together in building that message. But a big theme in the Challenger Customer book is who we present that message to. And this mobilizer, and I know we've mentioned the term a couple of times on this call, and I'm sure many people are familiar with the term, or at least should be familiar with the term. But I just want to spend a couple of minutes talking about why mobilizers are more important than ever in today's environment. And just to give some quick background on the idea of the mobilizer, for years and years and years, it was all about finding that advocate in the customer's organization. And we had this laundry list of criteria that we wanted that person to be. Well, it turns out in our study done a number of years ago, we found only 1 out of 700 individuals who had all of this ready-made criteria to be that perfect advocate for the idea that we bring to the customer's organization. And we found that actually there are different kinds or different flavors of individuals in those buying groups. And we have to really understand who those individuals are so that we can properly target our content and our strategy towards those with the highest likelihood to drive organizational action or change. And really the thesis of this story comes down to we need to find these mobilizers as opposed to individuals that are just talkers or blockers. And it's particularly important now when we're in this virtual selling environment where we have less of a direct access to how consensus is being built in the customer organization. We need to fully trust and be confident that the person we present that commercial insight to can turn and present it effectively to the organization and truly build that consensus. And ultimately, if we do it right, we see a much greater likelihood of performing at a high level. High performers have figured this out. This is one of those complexities that they figure out early and they go after, that they are selling to mobilizers, not selling to talkers or blockers. But I'd love to get your perspective on it because I know you were super tight in this research and really understanding these principles.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Finding a mobilizer these days is, it was always gold, but, it's even more valuable now because of the risk aversion that you'll see in our customer organizations with COVID. And I would say that beyond just finding these guys and engaging them with commercial insight, as commercial teams, we also need to equip them with the tools that are going to help them go and build the consensus that is needed to, drive the change in their organization and to get the other stakeholders in the buying group together around that change path. It came up a few moments ago when we were talking about this. A mobilizer, they're really good at driving change and building consensus around a change path. But what they probably haven't done as much of? Buying a solution like yours, right? You, as a supplier, sell your solution day in, day out, and it's sort of the water that you come to swim in. And it's really easy to underappreciate all that needs to happen for a mobilizer to sort of stitch that consensus together, all the way down to, in the weeds stuff. Like when they go talk to the CIO about this problem and solution, what pushback are they going to get? What are the objections they're going to get? What language do they need to use in engaging the CIO? What language do they need to use to engage the CFO and the other folks, right, in the buying group? And so these mobilizer, toolkits, as we came to call them, we profiled them a bit in the book, one from Marketo, one from Skillsoft. These are long form pieces of content that become the Bibles for, the mobilizers that are really trying to drive the change in the organization. And, thoughtful construction of these mobilizer toolkits is one of the first things that I recommend organizations do once they've constructed commercial insight. Because, you can find the mobilizers and teach them the commercial insight and they'll get it. But then you got to go the extra step to really help them go and stitch the consensus together, because there's a lot of other stakeholders out there and they all think and talk in different ways. And you've got to help that mobilizer be a very powerful translator to the rest of the 5.4, the rest of the 11, or however many are in your buying group.
Yeah, and you think about, it's such a good point, these toolkits, and I would echo your recommendation to look at those in the Challenger Customer Book. And you think about each of these stakeholders in this buying group is going to have very particular questions of that mobilizer. How does it affect this element of finance? How does it affect operations? How does it affect HR? Whatever the functional group might be that has a seat at that buying group table, they're going to have very particular, very critical questions. And it's so important to arm that mobilizer to be able to effectively answer those questions and defend the answers to those questions, because you're not going to have the opportunity to be there for that mobilizer to do a head nod to you every single time saying, oh, how would you answer this? You need to arm them to be able to do it. So I agree. Toolkits, I think, are so critical, particularly in this environment. And I just want to also make a plug. We haven't had much time on this webinar to go into what's a go-getter, what's a teacher, what's a skeptic. And they're very different from one another, very interesting profiles. Would recommend folks take a look. The book goes super deep on that content. Well, in the interest of time, I do want to just wrap us up here and kind of present a path forward. What we've talked about today, first of all, in developing commercial messaging, some of the concepts that we've talked about, it's got to be content that surprises and sparks attention. Initially, we've got to have content that is teaching the customer something new and ultimately can motivate that customer to action. And then the really important thing that Pat and I have talked about here is, do we have that content that can equip a mobilizer to build consensus in the organization? And I think we really should be, as we're retooling our content, as we're building new content, whatever stage this adjustment may be in our organization, that we're asking ourselves these critical questions. Is it surprising? Is it simple and clear? Will it spark attention? Does it teach something new? Have we built a content ecosystem that can equip for consensus creation? And this way, we're not wasting a lot of content build. We're very purposeful in how we're using our resources, which I think any senior leadership team and finance team would really appreciate today. Around the mobilizer, we just got to be careful of talkers. They can't transact in this environment. What does our mobilizer do with the insight? And can we really actively partner to build and engage the buying group? Because these buying groups may not be forming on their own in today's environment. Pat, do you have any other kind of perspective or thoughts as we're closing this up?
I would just thank you and thank the folks who have dialed in to join us for this conversation. And it's been a lot of fun, and I'm looking forward to the Q&A, Spencer. So yeah, much appreciated and important stuff, I think.
Bro, appreciate it. Pat and I really want to thank you as well. I want to thank you for the work you did a few years ago to put together all of this research and really carry the Challenger story forward. You've been incredibly instrumental in that, and also bringing marketing and sales together. And especially I want to thank you for your time today. Really appreciate getting on this webinar with you and catching up and hearing all of your perspectives. I do want to, before we go to Q&A, and we will here in just 1 minute, highlight a couple of ways Challenger can help you around the things that we've talked about today and others. As Pat mentioned and I mentioned, we've got this ongoing series of insight and perspective that we're constantly sharing on our website. Would also recommend you follow us on LinkedIn. The Challenger company on LinkedIn, because all of this gets presented on LinkedIn. We have some ways in which to also support your sellers and your marketers in getting a better understanding of customers. And that's a free e-learning set of e-learning modules on customer understanding that we've put out there for anyone to take over the next few weeks. So would really encourage you to connect with that. We'll be sending an email follow-up to this webinar where we'll have all of these resources as links, as well as the deck that we went through today and the recording of this webinar. Now, a couple of quick tools that to highlight that we'll be sending out as well. A quick checklist to really see if you're building a content ecosystem around Spark, Introduce, and Confront. And a quick mobilizer identification tool, which if you've read the book, you'll recognize. But we wanted to provide those tools for you as well, just to get you going on some of the things we've talked about. Pat, again, thank you. And with that, we'll move to our Q&A.
Let's do it.
Great. So we're now into Q&A. Pat, are you there? And you're on video this time, which is great. Thank you. And I know we've just got a couple of minutes for that, and we appreciate those who are staying on for this Q&A. There was a question that just came in, Pat, that I want to address here that I think is interesting. And it asks, the go-getter seems to be the mobilizer with the biggest positive impact. Can you dive a bit deeper into that specific buying personality? And I'd love to, let's talk a little bit about, just quickly about the go-getter in this environment in particular, because I think it's an important profile to be looking for.
Yeah, to me, the go-getter is almost the ideal mobilizer. So Leslie, I think it's a good insight you have there. This is the person that wants to drive change and get things done in the organization, in your customer's organization. And so if you can engage this person and hitch your wagon to this person and really equip them to drive the consensus that is going to be needed amongst the buying group, then that's gold. And it comes right back to that point that we were talking about a few minutes ago around the mobilizer toolkit. And to me, that mobilizer toolkit and how you structure that and build that to equip the go-getters, the teachers, the skeptics, the mobilizer personas there, that's super important. And I'd point to the examples in the Challenger Customer book from Marketo and Skillsoft as gold standard mobilizer toolkits. So there's ways I think that you can take a good mobilizer toolkit, break it into pieces, and distribute it to go-getters once you've identified them, that can really turbocharge their effectiveness in building the consensus and driving change. And Spence, I'd be curious for your thoughts as well on the go-getter. From a sales perspective, you're close to that.
Yeah, I think what's interesting and what we're hearing from a lot of people we talk to is, mobilizers in this environment with this increased risk aversion and difficult operating environment are a little bit fewer and farther between. They're more needles in a haystack. So you have to be really testing for them and looking for them in your commercial activity to make sure you're not spinning your wheels. I think the go-getter to me in this environment is that individual not comfortable being stuck in the mud. There's a lot of organizations stuck in mud right now, struggling to know what to do, what actions to take, having the courage to take those actions. But there are individuals out there, and we're seeing them across a lot of industries and a lot of organizations who don't want to just kind of sit idly by and feel stuck. They want to make things happen. They're willing to present ideas to the organization and go out on a limb. And if you can find those individuals, arm those individuals effectively with your idea, with your commercial insight, you can make a lot more traction. Here's another question I wanted to make sure we got in. And this one's very specific to this idea of the geography and the flow. What is a compelling question to ask a customer to gauge their level of action following the rational drowning stage? And the way I might think about this one is, you've done some kind of a thing like confront, right? You've shown them a rational argument that pain of same is greater than the pain of change. How can you kind of confirm that or make that relevant for their particular situation?
Yeah, when I think about this question, it's sort of are you inside the sales conversation, as you point out, Spencer? So, is this in the rational drowning stage of a seller interacting with a prospect or a stakeholder, and they're getting to that point of the choreography, and what is it that you might want to gauge at that point? Well, if I'm a challenger, I'm immediately thinking, I probably know that rational drowning is going to resonate with the person across the table. Obviously, you want to confirm that through body language and the like. But the thing I'm also wondering myself is, to what extent is that rational drowning likely to affect the other folks in the buying group? So getting a sense of that from the person you're talking to, I think, is really important. Or even working with them on how would they put that rational drowning in terms that are going to resonate more deeply with the other members of the buying group. And if we've done our homework as suppliers, we should really be able to coach that stakeholder we're talking to be able to get them to have, make that rational drowning all the more resonant for the other individuals in the buying group of their organization, because that's what we're going to ask them to do, right? Is to carry that torch. On the flip side, if you're, prior to that sales conversation, Spencer, this is what you were getting at, and you're at arm's length and, you're having to engage your customer just via content. I really like the notion of embedding indicator triggers into your content. And, I'll go back to that Skillsoft Mobilizer toolkit that we talked about in the Challenger customer. This is long form content, right? This is a 40 or 50 page purchasing toolkit for your mobilizers, but spread throughout the toolkit, which the toolkit itself is free for the taking. Skillsoft does not gate that content, so anybody could come and download that content. But what they do that's so clever across that toolkit is they embed different bits of kind of sub content in there. Whether it's customer testimonials or case studies or a business case template builder, and they gate those individual pieces. So now if you think about that, when a customer is reading through that toolkit and they click on the, oh, hey, a business case template, I want to download that, you've immediately got an indicator that they're leaning more toward action, right? Because they wouldn't be thinking about a business case, building a business case, unless they were heading in that direction, versus if they were just clicking on, oh, let me see, some of these testimonials or whatever. So if you do that very purposefully, you can, through your content, get a read on the intent of that stakeholder. So I think that's a way you could do that at arm's length.
No, that's a great point. And I think the other thing you have to be cognizant of in any buying group, particularly a large buying group of 10, 11 individuals, is that you're going to have some people very much emotionally wired and some people very much logically wired. And that's the importance of that rational drowning and emotional impact balance in the choreography. And I think so once you've presented that rational case, also think about adopting that case as well to speak to an emotional element. Going back to that Phillips 66 case, I remember there was a rational drowning component in that, which was, a certain percentage, I can't remember what that percentage was, of gas station owners feel uncomfortable using the bathroom in their gas station. And then you can immediately do a 1-2 punch there, which is that one of, do you foot flush? Or, how would you feel if your mother or grandmother used that bathroom in your gas station? And some people are going to resonate to the statistic there, and some people are going to resonate to that emotional story. And you want to make sure that you're giving them both so that they can be using both in the organization at arm's length to build that, motivate that action in the organization. Because you don't know, which side people are going to most resonate to. So you should have both.
That's a great point. Great point.
Great. Well, unfortunately, we are out of time. We really appreciate the questions that did come in. I know we didn't get to all of them, but we will be following up and doing some more. Pat, again, thank you so much for your time today, and wish you all the best there in New Zealand.
Yeah, thanks so much. Yeah, appreciate the opportunity, and thanks to everybody for dialing in today.
Cheers, everyone. Thank you so much.